Good evening, all. I welcome you to the final day of the live webinar on the ENT surgeries. We have covered many important surgeries, the anatomical landmark, the surgical details, then do's and don'ts, and each and every surgery in the last 5 days program. I hope you have learned many things which help you to do this surgery better in your clinical practice, and definitely it will help your patients. Continue the program. We have a little bit different format today. Today we have two speakers. The top is of course on maxillofacial surgeries, and Dr. Srinivas Kishore, he is going to talk on epiglottis in adult obstructive sleep apnea. Dr. Vijay Krishnan, he is going to talk, will external framework surgery will help to improve the outcome of obstructive sleep apnea. Our usual speaker, Dr. Vikas Argawal, he is today the moderator. I welcome all of you to this program. So today I have the privilege of what we can say introducing Dr. Vikas Agarwal to the audience. So I'll take my time, sir, and I'll introduce you in detail. Okay. Dr. Vikas Agarwal is a consultant ENT and sleep apnea surgeon, transoral robotic surgeon. He's a past president of Indian Association of Surgeons for Sleep Apnea. He's one of the pioneers in different surgeries, which I'll mention one by one. He's a visiting consultant in 7 hospitals. He's a robotic sleep surgeon. He is a pioneering figure in stroboscopy in Western Bombay. He's one of the pioneers in the drug-induced sleep endoscopy in Bombay. He is a pioneer in coagulation surgery in Mumbai. He performed the first submucosal endoscopic tongue-based resection in Asia for severe sleep apnea, a new method called SMEL, and he presented at the World Congress on Sleep Apnea in Rome. Similarly, he discovered the role of salpingo-pharyngeal fold in lateral collapse of obstructive sleep apnea, first presented at the World Congress of Sleep Apnea, Rome. He is the first person to do a first robotic tongue-based surgery workshop in the world, attended by many ENT surgeons. Not only that, he has performed the first robotic-based tongue surgery for obstructive sleep apnea in India. I think it's a very, very small introduction for a big man we have with us today. And today he is not speaking, he is moderating. But with this, I'll hand over the session to Dr. Vikas Agarwal, and he will take the proceeding from now. Thank you.
So again, a very good evening to all of you. At the outset, my sincere thanks to Zydus for supporting this program. And today we have two of my best friends and icons in sleep apnea surgery in India by themselves. Dr. Srinivas Kishore, who will be speaking on epiglottic surgeries in OSA, and Dr. Vijay Krishnan from Chennai, who will be speaking on the skeletal surgeries in OSA. So we all know that obstructive sleep apnea is a multifactorial issue and there are multiple levels of collapse. And we have discussed in detail in the last 5-6 sessions about different types of surgeries that we perform. So now epiglottic surgery is again required when CPAP is ineffective. If some patient has epiglottic collapse, if you try to give CPAP, the epiglottis will fall like a lid and it will close the whole laryngeal inlet. And so these patients again are at risk of dying because there is no treatment for them. And epiglottic surgery being quite deep inside the epiglottis, the structure by itself is pretty difficult to reach and treat. But in the next, say, half an hour to 45 minutes, Srinivas will make the subject so easy for you that you'll understand if you have a patient with epiglottic collapse, how you approach that patient and how you operate that patient. What are the complications you can expect and how you deal with them. You can type your questions in the side box and I'll be very happy to take your questions, all the relevant questions one by one. And then Vijay Krishnan will take over for the skeletal surgeries. And then all different types of skeletal surgeries will be described, whatever is relevant in the next, say, 35 to 45 minutes. And again, we'll take questions. So without wasting any time, may I ask my friend Dr. Srinivas Kishore, I'm sure he does not need any introduction. All of you in our country know Dr. Srinivas Kishore from Hyderabad very well. He is working at many hospitals in Hyderabad, and he is one of the biggest names in the country for obstructive sleep apnea. He does tongue-based surgery, he does palatal surgery, he does everything. But today I've asked him to speak on epiglottic surgery, which is again a very, very difficult surgery. So Srinivas, kindly take over and take us through the journey of epiglottic surgeries.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, thank you, Vikas, for your kind words. Let me share my screen.
Yes.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, very well.
Yeah.
So I'm muting myself.
Yes. Am I loud and clear?
Yes, very much, Kishore.
Okay, great. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Zydus. Thank you, Vikas. Thank you, Vijay, for coming on board for this episode of ENT Dialogue. I myself have been a part of this ENT Dialogue, and I have actually learned quite a few points in this. As you all know, and as Vikas said, obstructive sleep apnea is a condition caused by obstructions at multiple levels. Now, till the advent of a wonderful investigation tool called drug-induced sleep endoscopy, which in short we call DISE, the role of epiglottis has not been really highlighted. So till the onset of DISE, people used to think that obstructions in OSA happen at the level of the nose, the palate, and the tongue base. Now, there is often situations in medicine where there is a situation where you don't know whether it is a friend or a foe. Similar is a situation here, dear colleagues. As you all know, epiglottis is one of the very important structures that most of us think about or taught during our medicine, our postgraduates, that it helps in preventing aspiration. It is supposed to be a friend. It is a friend. And it has beautifully certain receptors on top of the laryngeal surface of the epiglottis and along the area epiglottic folds that actually initiates a reflex that closes the glottis. And this is a glottic close reflex. And we know that this actually prevents aspiration. But sometimes the very epiglottis that is supposed to protect us from aspirations, because of certain changes, causes problems. Let's see how epiglottis, which is deemed to be a friend for us, can turn into a foe in the next few minutes. Now, epiglottis collapse can be divided into two kinds. One is primary epiglottis collapse, like this. The patient is asleep and my scope is at the level of the tongue base, and you can actually see with every breath the patient is taking, the epiglottis keeps going inside, and it is going independent of any other structure. There is no other structure causing this kind of causing the epiglottis to go inside and completely shut the epiglottis. Now this, dear colleagues, is called primary epiglottic collapse. Now, look at this video. What are you seeing here? You're also seeing that the epiglottis is falling. But why is it falling? You can see an anteroposterior collapse of the epiglottis, and which is happening secondary to the tongue base. So here you see the tongue base is completely blocking, and this has happened because of the tongue causing the obstruction to the epiglottis. So this is a secondary epiglottic collapse. So this is primary epiglottic collapse, and this is secondary epiglottic collapse. Now we should not have any confusion in this, because the treatments are completely different. If you have a primary epiglottic collapse, the treatment is very different, wherein you are directly addressing the epiglottis, whereas in secondary epiglottic collapse, as you saw, the tongue base needs to be treated. That means the epiglottis is causing a collapse because of the tongue base. So you need to treat the tongue base and not the epiglottis. Now, DICE has actually taken us completely into a different dimension. As DICE is progressing, we are able to do procedures called interventional DICE. Here is a patient in which we have put in a nasopharyngeal airway. Now, what we normally achieve in interventional DICE is to see if a particular level of obstruction proximal to the culprit can be cleared by the presence of a nasopharyngeal airway, thereby to know whatever surgery we do proximal to it, will it be successful? Let me put it very simply. For example, you have an obstruction you have seen an obstruction at the level of the epiglottis. Now, a lot of us sleep surgeons say that epiglottic collapse can be secondary to an obstruction which is happening at a much higher level. That means probably at the level of the palate or at the level of the oropharynx. So what we do to sort of mimic that, you basically put a nasopharyngeal airway and you bypass all the structures that can actually cause severe amount of negative pressure at the level of the epiglottis. Now look at this video. Now we have bypassed everything and now we are looking at the epiglottis. Now just take a look at the epiglottis. Now there is no tongue base, there is no lateral pharyngeal wall, there is no palate. Yet in this particular patient, the epiglottis is completely collapsing. But if you are able to see a little deeper inside, you can also see that the supraglottic mucosa is also prolapsing into the laryngeal inlet. This, dear colleagues, is an absolute contraindication for a surgical intervention for this particular patient. The best thing to do would be to actually trach him or probably some other procedure. And that is how DICE and interventional DICE have brought us into this particular dimension where we are able to actually very clearly predict the success of a particular procedure. Now, when you look at literature, the prevalence of epiglottis has been there right from 1980, 1998. Tutel-Folmo was the first man to actually, because there was no DICE then, even though there was DICE, but it was not very popular. In 104 subjects, they found that epiglottis was a problem in 11.5. And then a lot of people have done DICE and they found out that Land, for example, in 2015, found out 42% of their patients having obstruction at the level of the epiglottis. Ravi Sloot from the Netherlands found out in 100 patients, 38% of the patients are having epiglottic collapse. And look at the level of evidence, it's level 2. That means it's pretty significant. Again, with a level 2 evidence from China, Professor Zhang in 2014, in 62 patients, only 9.7% of patients developed epiglottic collapse. So the numbers are all over the place, but most of the numbers are basically suggesting a number above 30%. Now, that means, what does that tell you? If literature is quoting the presence of so much of epiglottis in drug-induced sleep endoscopy in obstructive sleep apnea, that means it is obstructive sleep apnea secondary to epiglottic collapse does happen. Now, let me pick up two very important papers from that literature. Now, Cavalier, they actually compared the degrees of patterns of airway collapse in awake and in DICE. Okay, that's what makes it very interesting. And they had 66 patients. And the authors found that 22.7% of the patients showed an involvement of the epiglottis that was not assessed during awakefulness. That means if you have analyzed a patient and assessed a patient and you've done a particular surgery for this patient, there is a very high chance that there may be epiglottis in your patient and you have completely missed it. And in that group, they found that anteroposterior collapse of the epiglottis, like the jar lid that I showed you, the first video that I showed you, 13%, and 9.1% is a lateral collapse, which I will show you in the subsequent video. Now, Kent et al. Identified 35% of patients with CPAP intolerance, exactly what Vikas was speaking of before we spoke in the lecture. 35 patients with CPAP intolerance are incomplete response to oral appliance. So here are patients who opted for a non-conventional or a non-surgical treatment for obstructive sleep apnea, which is putting on oral appliances and CPAP. They found out that these kind of patients, 35 patients, in 35 patients, 31% had epiglottic collapse. So that means even before you want to give CPAP for your patient or you want to give oral appliance for these patients, it is important that you do a drug-induced sleep endoscopy to actually see if there is an epiglottic collapse, because no other treatment modality can give you an understanding as much as a DICE would. Me and Vijay always have this discussion when I say this. He says that dynamic MR also can show it. To me, DICE can show it. I tried looking at it in dynamic MR. It doesn't really give you the kind of understanding that of patterns of epiglottic collapse that DICE gives. Anyway, that is another discussion for another time. Now, this is based on our own series, and we have found in our series that 34.3% of our patients had epiglottic collapse. So that is a significant number to ignore. Now, even when you do a flexible laryngopharyngoscopy in the outpatient, sometimes you will just based on the look of the epiglottis, you can pick up that this patient is a possible epiglottic collapse. Just pay attention to this video. This is an awake patient sitting in the outpatient, getting a flexible laryngopharyngoscopy done. Just like that, sitting, his epiglottis is collapsing. So here are patients with a red flag that would tell you that, okay, this patient might have an epiglottic collapse causing or contributing to his AHI in obstructive sleep apnea. Also pay attention to the shape of the epiglottis. It's slightly into an infantile phase. Now, what may be the pathophysiology? So when you really dig deep into this, it has been found that the culprit is the hyoepiglottic ligament. Precisely the collagen and the elastin fibers, the composition, the type of collagen and elastin is supposed to change with age. But what happens in certain obstructive sleep apnea patients is the collagen changes from type 3 to type 1, making it more flexible, more stretchable, more pliable, more collapsible, causing epiglottic obstruction. Now, remember, I showed you one pattern of epiglottic collapse, that is the anteroposterior kind of epiglottic collapse. Now look at this kind of epiglottic collapse. Are you able to see how the, Vikas, are you able to see the video?
Very clearly, very clearly.
Okay.
I have just muted myself.
Okay, then
very
that's
clearly.
Fine. Okay.
Everything is going smooth. If there's any problem, I'll
yeah. So if you look at this kind of collapse, this again is an independent primary epiglottic collapse. Now this collapse is very different from the collapse I showed you earlier. Now look at this collapse. There is no tongue base, there is no lateral pharyngeal wall, and the epiglottis is completely collapsing. And this is not a child, dear colleagues. Please remember, this is not a child, this is an adult. That kind of collapse is again very different and needs to be managed very differently when compared to this kind of collapse. Okay, and DICE gives you this kind of videos that helps you to understand the pattern of collapse, the severity of collapse, thereby the pathology, understanding the pathology, and you can design the surgery based on the pattern that you see. Now, there are many types, ways to skin a cat. There are 100 ways to do palatal surgery. There are many ways to do epiglottic surgery. Now, let me just take you through each of these surgeries. Some of them I have been very successful with, and I have stuck to those techniques. I also on this form would like to share with you some of my surgeries which didn't go totally well. I'm not ashamed of talking about those at this point. So I will lay it across on the table for you guys to decide and see which one. So obviously I want to show you my more successful surgeries first. Now, this is a procedure for anterior posterior collapse. Now pay attention to the entire video. Now, if you look at this, what am I using? I'm actually using an anesthetist McIntosh laryngoscope blade. As you can see, this is a flexible endotracheal tube. This is a tube that we only use for all cases of obstructive sleep apnea. This is a flexometallic endotracheal tube. Now, I'm going to play this unedited video. Now, what have I taken first? Again, pay attention to this instrument. This is a pediatric lap instrument. Now, why did I choose this? Because you're operating at a depth. You are using very long instruments, and with one hand, you are holding the scope. You can use the microscope as you can use the microscope in tongue-based surgery, but somehow I don't think I've got control of things. Somehow I was not happy doing it with the microscope. I find it much easier doing it with the telescope in one hand, and most of us are excellent when it comes to that. So I'm playing the video now. Just go through the video. So I'm starting at the lateral margin of this. So why I also chose this laryngoscope is when you put this in the valvula and lift it and suspend it onto over a table, or you can suspend it from a suspension draft and bipod stand also. So now what did I do? I just jumped to this particular thing. Let me explain here. Now I tried taking multiple bites here, okay? Somehow it was not cutting at all because the epiglottis is very slippery. Unless you hold it with one hand and you cut it, you don't get good results. And the mucosa on the laryngeal surface of the epiglottis is taut and is adherent to the cartilage, whereas the lingual surface of the epiglottis, because of all the negative forces and the shearing forces that have been applied to the lingual surface of the epiglottis, the mucosa is very redundant, and hence it starts bleeding very easily because of all the inflammation there is. So what I did, I took my EVAC 70 wand, which is the workhorse for me, and most of my colleagues do agree to it. So what I did is I just demucosalized the lingual surface and the laryngeal surface of the epiglottis. This is an unedited video, dear colleagues. So you will see some very premature kind of movements or some not perfect movements. But yeah, I'm getting there. So I'm using the EVAC 70 wand to basically clear off the mucosa, denude the entire mucosa. And I'm using bursts of energy, as you can see. Now, at this margin, there is going to be an artery which is a direct branch of the lingual artery called the. So now you can see how I'm holding the scope. This is a completely unedited video. I'm also using a cheek retractor. There are some vessels here, but they're not major. Coblator is a fantastic tool to operate at such depths. I mean, I will totally vouch by it. Let it be tongue base, let it be epiglottis. I will show you some other videos which I've done with the laryngeal wand. This is basically your tonsil wand, the EVAC one. So now that I have removed all the mucosa, now I'm going to use this same instrument, which is the pediatric lap scissors. The fantastic point about this is that it actually turns 360 degrees. So it lets you basically go and cut in all the directions. When you do this procedure, dear colleagues, try to be always above the hyoid bone, because if you are infrahyoid, you are going to enter into the pre-epiglottic space and then the infection is going to come. So now what happened? As I was cutting in, I nipped off the epiglottic branch of the lingual artery as it was entering into the pharyngo-epiglottic fold. Now, here is a tip again. Now, this artery, as you can see, which is bleeding here, is actually a medium-sized artery. So when you are putting so much pressure, about 300 psi of pressure on your coblator, now look at, I will just pause it here. This artery is coming like this, and you put the wand like this. What is here? Here is the suction port of your coblator. So what is happening here is that every time I'm taking the coblator to cauterize it, this artery is going into the hole of the suction port of your EVAC 70 wand. And every time I'm trying to cauterize it, it's going in there, and then it seems to be getting cauterized, but it is not getting cauterized. So another trick here that you can use is that you should ask your colleague or your nurse to basically, when you are there, kink the suction. And second thing is keep the coblator there for about 4 seconds, 4 to 5 seconds. And that is what Smith & Nephew also tells us. It is not a touch and go kind of a cauterization if you want to use the blue pedal. Keep it pressed for about 4 seconds by the clock, and then you will cauterize the any kind of a medium-sized vessel. So 2 points there. One, if there is a vessel which is parallel to the suction port, kink your suction, and then number 2, keep it pressed for about 4 seconds. So now you saw how the scissors, which is a pediatric lap scissors, went in all the directions and then sort of could cut and take out the upper portion. Now, this is the patient's post-op, immediate post-op. Post-op, this is post-op 7, and this is post-op 6 weeks. It heals beautifully. Trust me, dear colleagues, these kind of patients, they are so happy, they are so thankful that they say, doctor, my quality of life has changed so much that they're able to sleep well. These are patients, remember, that you can't put them on an oral appliance therapy. You can't put them on CPAP. And once you do this kind of a procedure, you can actually change their life. They will be ever grateful to you. If there are any kind of surgeries in ENT other than stapes surgery, I think this is one surgery that can give you results on the table. Immediately, the patient will benefit. Now, This is another kind of procedure. Remember, I told you about the epiglottis, which was folding side to side. Now, this is a procedure that you would want to do for an epiglottis that is folding side to side. That means a lateral pattern of collapse. Now, again, same technique. This is a part of multi-level. I'm also using lap instruments. Now, let me just, so you take, yeah, like this. Now, let me just pause it here. Now, a point that I would like you to learn, and also which I learned by myself after a lot of mistakes, is don't try to go from the epiglottis. Try to go from above and hold the suture along the long axis of your needle holder. So that, like how you suture your turbinates, your middle turbinates after fess. So this way, if you go, that will help you to sort of, this is all me trying to, you know, go from here, go from there, and trying to see, because this is a very, very difficult way to go forward. Well, if you come from above, it's much easier. So let me cut to here, wherein with all difficulty, I put one stitch and I'm trying to take one more stitch. Mind you, there is not too much space here. And you go in, you will have to engage it again, because the moment you go there, again the needle sort of turns. So always take, don't take a round body needle, take a cutting needle. Let me just cut the chase here. There's a lot of work up that is done. Okay, sorry. Okay, so with lot of difficulty, I have put in those sutures. So again, the suture knot has to be tied in the oral cavity. It should not be tied in the down below near the epiglottis. So I'm tying the knot in the oral cavity and then pushing it down. So that is a way of dealing with this. So I'm again using the my pediatric lap scissors to sort of cut it. Now, again, a take-home point here. Now, when you do this particular surgery, you have to cause, the whole idea is to create a glottoepiglottopexy. Now, is it possible to do the kind of technique that I showed you earlier, to do a suprahyoid epiglottectomy? Yes, you can. But I think this kind of technique of epiglottopexy, when you do it with a suture, makes sure that the lingual surface of the epiglottis and the raw surface of the epiglottis or raw surface of the tongue base that you have created are tethered to each other, so that there is good fibrosis that happens. Now, there are many other ways. You can put the Lenchenberger needle, put one above, one below, and do those. There are so many. Now, I will also share with you some of my other misadventures. I wouldn't really call it a misadventure. Now, here I'm using a harmonic scalpel. Now, here is another collapse wherein I've decided to do a wedge resection. Why did I think of doing a wedge resection? Because when the trapdoor happens, all you want is a wedge to resect. Now, this is another very good tool to do, and a lot of you must have had experience on this. It's a fantastic tool. A lot of lap surgeons, head and neck surgeons use this, but particularly I didn't find it very easy to use when I'm single-handed. As you can see, I am struggling with this. The idea of this presentation is not to show how well I can do this. I just want you to, I want to take you guys through the journey, through the difficulties and the happiness that I have faced when I'm doing this procedure. So again, just like the coblator, this is another instrument that you can take it very close to your endotracheal tube. Okay, the cuts are not very precise, as you can see, but yeah, it will take you there. These are not very, as some of you who have used this for head and neck would know, that these are not sharp scissors. This is like blunt cusps, and this would basically help you to cut. It's a sort of, it doesn't give you the same kind of resection that the scissors did after denuding the mucosa. So even today, if I have to do an epiglottis, tomorrow you call me and say you do an epiglottis for me, I will do this procedure that I demonstrated to you in the first video. But I just want you to, I want to show you how these other tools can also work, and maybe you can do an excellent work, much better work than me using this particular tool. As the saying goes, the tool is as smart as the fool that is operating it. So I sort of did that job, which obviously not very proud of. And ultimately it came out well. This is the post-op 2 weeks. As you can see, this is post-op 2 weeks. You can see the patient is eating everything. This is the wedge resection that we have done. So this part of the epiglottis is all right. This part of the epiglottis is all right. This is the epiglottis we have cleared. And as it is in all epiglottic surgeries, once you do it, patients are super thrilled because they start getting results from day one. Also did a little bit of a tongue base. He had a lingual tonsil hypertrophy. That's the reason why you see a little bit of coagulum formation here. Now, here I'm using the coblation wand, the Smith & Nephew laryngeal wand. Okay, so here what I've done is I've got a Kida in my head and said, why don't I just eat it up? Why should I cut it? And so I took the laryngeal wand, and you can see how beautifully the laryngeal wand also is eating up the suprahyoid epiglottis. And as you all know, the pain scores, if you really see, one is that in coblation, the pain scores are not that much because it's kind of a gentle device. And then this procedure takes, it's much faster. It's going off quite fast because coblation is 4-in-1. It's irrigating the field, it's ablating the field, it's coblating the field, it's cauterizing the field, and it's sucking the field. So this is a kind of technique that I did for a couple of cases, and my results were not bad at all. Like I keep saying, any patient with epiglottis, the result is excellent, 100%. Patient is very happy. And at the end of the procedure, again, this is the hyoid bone. You can actually feel, because your instrument becomes an extension of your hand, you can feel the hyoid bone, which is a hard bone. And I sort of took it off, and I found that in this particular procedure, you're much quicker also. So at the end, I'm taking a true biter forceps. I was not really happy with what I did. So here is a little bit of bleeder. So I'm completely cleared that off. And again, these patients are quite happy. The procedure is quite quick. There are absolutely, and this is an unedited video, but has been made into two. So the whole procedure is only for 6 minutes, but I took only 15 minutes to do this procedure. So I would like to bring this question to you. Is epiglottic surgery really necessary for obstructive sleep apnea patients with obstruction, with epiglottic collapses? So a lot of you must have really thought about this. Or is it really, are you going with an overkill? Okay. Now, when you are faced with this kind of a question, that means if is the palate, or is it something more proximal to the epiglottis causing an obstruction? So you can do an interventional DISE. You can negate all the levels of obstruction that are causing the epiglottic collapse and see for yourself in DISE. So if there is an obstruction, like I showed you in the DISE earlier, and then there is this, after all that, after putting the nasopharyngoscope and you are seeing an epiglottic collapse, might as well do it. But at this juncture, since we always have to talk about literature, I want to bring in this topic of this article, which was published in 2019 in the Laryngoscope. This is a fantastic article, and that's the reason why I want to bring this up to you. The title is epiglottic surgery necessary for OSA patients with obstructive sleep apnea, with epiglottic obstruction? So the aims of the present study was to assess the success of multi-level sleep surgery without epiglottic intervention, even in the presence of an epiglottic obstruction. Let me read this again for you. The aim of the present study was to assess the success of multi-level sleep surgery without epiglottic intervention, even in the presence of epiglottic obstruction. And look at the level of evidence. It's 3B. So it's not a paper that you can just throw it out of the window. So I don't want to talk about all the results and all, but I would like to bring in certain highlights that this paper brought about. What they're saying is, DISE is a procedure designed to mimic a state closely resembling natural sleep. Nevertheless, drug-induced sleep endoscopy may still produce a higher level of pharyngeal collapse, resulting in exaggerated picture of obstruction. So in their study, they are saying that the success rate of epiglottic multi-level surgery was 44% in epiglottic obstruction group and 40.7% in the non-epiglottic obstruction group. That means they did the same kind of surgery without doing an epiglottic surgery, and the success rate was not very different. So ultimately, they said that we believe that the prevalence of epiglottic obstruction requiring epiglottic intervention is less common than what is found during DISE. Well, this is something that they published. We are also coming out with our own numbers. And to me, I think these patients objectively are one of the most thankful surgeries, patients after any kind of multi-level surgery. So with this slide, dear colleagues, I'll end this discussion, end this talk, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Vikas, please take over.
Yeah, hi Kishore. Thank you for the excellent talk. I don't have any better word than that. And I'm, swarmed with questions.
Yes, I'm sure.
There are more than, I think, more than 1,241 people watching you live.
Okay.
Right now, and they have put so many questions. I'm trying to put the questions in groups so that I can ask you, because so many people ask the same questions.
Sure.
But I think before I ask you questions, I will first ask Dr. Vijay Krishnan to present his presentation on the maxillomandibular advancement. Sorry, the skeletal surgeries, all kind of skeletal surgeries. And then in the meantime that he makes his presentation, I'll put all these questions into groups so that every question can be answered.
Sure.
So Dr. Vijay, can you unmute yourself and can you start your presentation? So let me introduce Dr. Vijay Krishnan. Srinivas, can you get out of
I will,
your
yes.
sharing screen? No, I think Srinivas is still sharing his slide.
Yeah.
Srinivas, you'll have to stop sharing your screen. Srinivas? Yeah. So Dr. Vijay Krishnan is working at Madras ENT Research Foundation in Chennai. He is the secretary of our Indian Association of Surgeons for Sleep Apnea for last so many years. And he does not need any introduction to any person who is doing sleep apnea work in this country. So without any further introduction or delay, I would ask Vijay to make his presentation on the external framework surgery to improve obstructive sleep apnea. Dr. Vijay.
Yeah. Good evening, dear friends. And at the outset, I would like to thank Zydus for arranging this wonderful program. And we are very happy to be part of this program. And I would like to thank Dr. Vikas for the wonderful introduction and Kishore for sharing the podium. So today, what we have seen so far is soft tissue surgery about the curing or correcting OSA problem. So what I am going to share with you is whether external framework surgery or a skeletal surgery will it improve OSAS. So as we have discussed for this long period of time, we know that OSA is a common disease of both adult and pediatric age group, and it is a spectrum of disorder with could be a primary snoring or could be a severe OSAS. So the surgical management, if you think of, is involves many specialties, especially the facial-maxillary colleagues should be your dear friend to help you in difficult cases, and bariatric surgeon also plays a major role. So in the pro forma of selecting the patient management, the treatment selection is very important. The various treatment options are there. If the first comes is the lifestyle modification, and the surgery is the last option, but still each and every one plays a major role. So there are a lot of failures with both CPAP and soft tissue surgery. There are a lot of papers, literatures clearly says that the compliance rate of CPAP is 50 to 65% maximum, and the surgical success rate, especially in a soft tissue surgery, can be as low as 30 to 45%, or maybe as maximum as 70% or 80% maximum in a single level collapse or a very mild to moderate level of OSA. This is what made everyone to think what next. So various levels of obstruction is the identifying various levels of obstruction and the severity of OSA is the key. And identifying the factors which predicts the less successful outcome is very important. Like severe OSA patients with severe oxygen desaturation, with comorbid conditions, or patients with central apnea. But most important thing is the mandibular deficiency and hypoplastic midface deformity also plays a major role. In Wisconsin's cohort study, 2/3 of the variability in AHI is due to obesity and facial structure. Especially in non-obese patients, facial structure plays a major role and an important primary factor, like skeletal morphology, soft tissue, obesity. Especially in Indian scenario, the genetics plays an important role in the ethnic cluster, which is causing the facial phenotype, and the cultural and environmental factor also plays a role. For lesser degrees of obesity, Asians and American Indians are at risk for more severe degree of illness compared with Caucasians. If you understand this principle of the relation between the airway, soft tissue, and the bony framework, you can understand which patient will need which kind of procedure and surgery. For example, if you consider this is an airway with a smaller bony compartment like a severe retrognathia or hypoplastic maxilla that can compress the soft tissue, thereby the airway is narrow. At the same time, the soft tissue is very thicker in obesity, that also compromise the airway. Sometimes it will be very severe in obese retrognathics, where the box framework is also smaller and the soft tissue is also more, that can compress the airway much more severe. So the upper airway is assessed by various methods like lateral cephalometry, dynamic MRI, flexible scopies, drug-induced laryngoscopy, apneograph, etc. But our discussion point, the most important thing for a facial-maxillary procedure will be a lateral cephalometry. This may be looking very difficult to understand, may just ignore it. But as an ENT surgeon, what we really want to know is few lines. This is the sella, this is the nascian, and this is anterior nasal spine, this is posterior nasal spine, and this is nonian, and this is gonian. So this line is the mandibular plane, and this line is the cranial base line. And the most important thing is A and B. A is subspinal and B is submental. So the line from N, the nascian to A, and line from N to B is important to assess the position of the maxilla and mandible in relation to the skull base angle. And this position of the mandibular plane and the height, this hyomandibular angle is important in assessing the position and understanding the posterior airway space, whether the hyomandibular plane is the cause for narrowing. So other things what we can measure from lateral cephalometry, the soft tissues, are like the soft palate length from the posterior nasal spine to the tip of the palate. So this gives you an idea of the soft palate length, and this gives you a thickness of the soft palate width. And the other thing is the tongue length and the width. This also gives you an idea whether the patient is having any hypertrophied tongue base. This SNA angle is related to the position of the maxilla to the skull base. So if this is the skull base and this is the maxilla, this is SNA angle. If it is usually 82 degree, and if it is more than 82 degree, it is prognathic. The maxilla is forward. If it is less than 82 degree, it is retrognathic. Retrognathic maxilla, not the mandible. So the position of the maxilla is very important in the space behind the velum and the nasopharynx. So SNB angle is 80 degree, just a difference, 82 degree and this is 80 degree. So this gives you an idea about the relation of mandible to the skull base. Same way, if it is more than 80 degree, it is prognathic, and less than 80 degree is retrognathic. It is very easy to remember. The mandible is, the lower jaw is always inside the upper jaw, that is maxilla. So the maxilla is little forward than the mandible. So that 2 degree is the difference should be there. Otherwise, there will be open bite. So the influence of cranial base angle is very important. More length, if attached with the maxilla, will cause a prognathic maxilla. Thereby, it pushes the mandible backwards. At the same time, if the length of the cranial base is smaller, that also pulls the maxilla behind, which will narrow the space behind the maxilla, that by cause obstruction at the nasopharynx and velum. Same way, cranial base angle. So this is the angle between the sella angle, that is cranial base angle. If this angle is more obtuse, the mandible will be pulled backwards. This is retrognathia. And if the angle is smaller, the mandible will be pushed forward. That will cause prognathic mandible. So, but same time, this lateral cephalometry this is very important to identify ourselves whether to involve facial-maxillary colleagues or not. So, a lot of drawbacks as it is done in an awake position. An upright position is a 2-dimensional, but 3-dimensional reconstruction of the skull facial skeleton is also being done, and it is not a dynamic one. So this is not going to diagnose OSA. This is going to help you to sort out how to do surgery and what kind of surgery is needed. So this is the Riley Powell Stanford surgical protocol, which is being followed for many years. This has been updated, and here we classify as phase 1 and phase 2. And phase 1 is being done mostly is a soft tissue surgery. At the same time, my simple procedures like mandibular osteotomy or hyoid myotomy has been combined with palatal surgery. But when there is a failure of these procedures after 6 months, the phase 2 is recommended, like maxillomandibular advancement. But the recent protocol clearly says that in severe OSAs with obvious retrognathia or prognathic maxilla and retrognathic mandible, when the relation is not correct, we can straight away plan for maxillomandibular procedures. So there are various ways to enlarge retropharyngeal space, soft tissue surgeries and bony framework surgery. My discussion today is going to be on 2 procedures like mandibular osteotomy with genioglosal advancement and hyoid myotomy and suspension, which we'll try to say. So the idea is to make an osteotomy in the mandible at the genial tubercle and advance the attachment of genioglossus muscle, and if possible rotate it 90 degrees without tearing the muscle. It is introduced by Riley in 1986, being done in patients with retroglossal or tongue-base collapse. The success rate for mild OSAS patient is 77%, but in severe OSAS patient, that means I would say it could be because of muscle tone, hypotonic tongue-based muscles can cause the success rate will be around 42%. So the rationale is to increase the posterior airway space by pulling the tongue base forward, and also as we are tightening the muscle by pulling the bony segment, it increases the tension and tone. These are the candidates for genioglosal advancement, patients with mild retrognathia. So the idea is to pull the genial tubercle forward. So this is how the window we are going to make, and this is going to pull the attachment of the genioglossus muscle. If you see here, we will be able to see the fibers are attached like this, and these fibers mainly addresses the upper tongue base. If there is a lower tongue base obstruction, entire lower part of the mandible has to be pulled forward. So usually OPG will be done to assess the genial tubercle and its relation to the incisors root, so that we can avoid injury to the blood vessels and nerve supply to the incisors and canine. Otherwise, this may cause a permanent anesthesia and devascularization of the teeth. There are various morphological patterns of genial tubercles available in Indian population. The 5 types are available, and the most common type is type 2, which has 2 superior genial tubercle and 1 median ridge, which fused in the inferiorly. Type 1 is 2 superior and 2 inferior genial tubercle, and type 3 is 2 superior genial tubercle and a rough impression below them, and type 4 is single median eminence, and type 5 sometimes there can be an absence of genial tubercle. Accordingly, various modifications being done. Instead of making a rectangular window, square type, oval type, basically the idea is to pull the mandible forward. And all these modifications happen because of the complications and the failures. So usually about 1 centimeter by 1.4 centimeter rectangular window is made. But more than that is preserving 5 millimeter below the central incisors and lateral incisor, and 10 millimeter, that is 1 centimeter above the inferior border of the mandible is very important. At least 1 centimeter we have to give, otherwise the lower border may be very unstable and can get easily fractured by a simple tedious injury. Micromotor, Fisher burr, titanium plates and screws, and hypotensive anesthesia are very important. Blood may be kept reserved. This is a short video clip. You can see this is the central incisor and lateral incisor. A sublabial incision is being made between both the canines. Go straight into the periosteum. It is very important. I will tell you why later. So go straight to the bone, periosteum, and elevate. And there, lateral most part, you'll be able to see the mental nerve which is coming out. So make a rectangular window and open. First, you'll be drilling the labial cortex of the mandible. So once you open up the labial cortex, you'll be reaching the medulla where there will be a lot of bleeding. Then you will be reaching the lingual cortex. And the very difficult and important area is the angles. And keep a stabilizing screw and pull it with coccus forceps and fix it with plates and screws. And this is the advancement, few millimeters, 5 millimeter to 1 centimeter. We can advance. Sometimes in severe OSAs, severe retrographic patients, we can advance to the thickness of the mandible. Here you can see how much we could pull. It has to be very gentle movement, and sometimes you may have to push it from inside so that you don't avulse the muscle attached to the. So this much of advancement doesn't mean that it is going to cause any discomfort. Sometimes, if it is needed, we can even remove the labial cortex and medulla, and you can just fix the lingual cortex at the level of labial cortex. That means you are, if this is the labial cortex and if this is the lingual cortex is being pulled forward at the level of labial cortex. That means you are advancing the segment almost to the thickness of the mandible. These are various steps during the procedure. So the common complications is bleeding and later hematoma formation in the chin or hematoma inside the tongue and tongue muscle. So that may even, you have to be watchful during the first 48 hours. Otherwise, sometimes even have a airway compromise and stridor, and infection of the plates and screws. If you injure the canines and incisors, permanent anesthesia can happen. So mandibular fracture, as I told you. So most important thing is avoiding injury to the mental nerve. So you always should know the anatomy of this lingual nerve, which comes out through the mental foramen and supplies the lower lip. It comes out like this and nicely ramifies over the lower lip. This is why I told you straight go into the periosteum. Otherwise, you will be causing a thermal damage to the nerve fibers, which will cause paresthesia or dysgeusia into the lower lip. In severe retrognathics like this, just genioglossal advancement may not help. A sliding genioplasty will also improve his cosmetic appearance. Here, not only the genioglossus, the digastrics and geniohyoid muscles all are advanced. So the entire lower part of the mandible is pulled forward. This is very important and significant in patients with severe retrognathics and very low thin chin, we say. And this give a prognathic look without disturbing the dentoalveolar appearance. So here you can see the most important and crucial step is getting into the lingual cortex and a lot of bleeding, and getting into the lower part of the lower border of the mandible. And there is the mental nerve. You can see it is being stretched. Make sure it is not being avulsed or injured. So this is the post-operative X-ray of the patient with sliding genioplasty. You can see how much it is being advanced and how much airway space we can create. The advantage, as I told you, it gives more anterior position of the tongue and the mandible, improves the postoperative position of the hyoid also. So most of the patients I used to combine with the hyoid advancement. And usually these procedures I'll be doing along with my facial-maxillary colleagues, and it is very important legally also. And patients with long incisor teeth root, this patient is ideal. In patients with severe retromaxillary and retroglossal or retromandibular obstruction, entire maxillofacial advancement is very important and it is needed. You can combine sliding genioplasty with the mandibular and maxillary advancement. It is usually considered as phase 2 surgery as per the Stanford protocol, but now we can even straight away go for this procedure in severe cases. So it improves both retropalatal and retrolingual space and increases the airway caliber in an anteroposterior direction, and the success rate is claimed around 95%. At the same time, it has its own complications like malocclusion, inferior alveolar nerve injury or lingual nerve injury, infraorbital paresthesia when you are handling the maxilla, non-union or malunion of the fragmented segment. Relapse is more common, and TMJ complications because of pulling the mandible and rotating the maxilla. And a lot of dental work will be needed after adjusting the maxilla and mandible precision. So usually these patients will be having few features like retruded mandible and maxilla. And important thing is posterior vertical maxillary deficiency. This is what causing, that is the posterior part of the maxilla is deficient, and that is what we will be trying to correct it by rotating the maxilla. Thereby we are pulling the maxilla forward, and same time we are creating more space and the length of the posterior vertical segment of the maxilla. And usually these patients will be having a retroposition tongue and high mandibular plane with a short chin or with narrow nostrils and wide columella. So narrow nostril is clearly says that that is a high-arched palate, and the maxilla is deficient on the lateral aspect also. So the decreased maxillary and mandibular projection with counterclockwise rotation is the you should understand, so that you can correct it when you are doing the procedure. So as I told you, the common procedure done only to mandible is sagittal split mandibular osteotomy. The key steps are subperiosteal elevation of mucosa on both the sides of the mandible, and it is very understandable by seeing the video. You can see here this patient had malocclusion, so we have to remove one molar so that we can bring the mandible forward without causing facial So here you can see advancement genioplasty is being done, and we are, this is the lower 4 teeth, 5 teeth to the maxilla, and here we are out fracturing and preserving the nerve, and maxillary wiring is being done so that the alignment will not be changed, and only the splitted mandible will be pulled forward without changing the occlusion. It is very difficult to record also. So most important thing is to understand this no man's land or the danger zone where this inferior alveolar nerve can be easily damaged when you are splitting the mandible. This is how the cut's being done. One cut at the horizontal cut, and the nerve will be entering into this segment, and it will be running like this inside, and it will be coming and will be exiting outside. So as the first cut, it is like, if you think it is like attachment of the middle turbinate, I would say. So here, this is the vertical cut, and another vertical cut is oblique cut, and then a horizontal cut. So the nerve is going to enter into this segment, and this segment is fixed to the temporal bone or skull. Hope you could understand the split sagittally. We are splitting the mandible and pulling this segment forward. As I told you, various modifications we can do. If there is, we can combine with sliding genioplasty, and also we can remove one segment and fix it, and only this segment can be pulled forward. In maxillomandibular advancement, it's like Lee-Ford type 1 osteotomy, and free this angle base and pull it forward along with the mandible. At same time, slight rotation has to be given so that the posterior vertical height of the maxilla can be increased. This is what happening, increasing the airway space in the posterior aspect at the level of both velum and tongue base. So complication, as I told you, malocclusion, the nerve injuries, malunion, relapse, and TMJ complications. Pediatric obstructive sleep apnea, one of the major common cause is adenotonsillar hypertrophy. You all know that. And another important factor for them is the upper airway resistance, where the nose plays a major role. The nasal resistance plays a major role in pediatric age group. Children with persistent OSA after an adenotonsillectomy is most likely because of this turbinate hypertrophy or a simple deviated nasal septum or this faciomaxillary retropositioned maxilla or mandible. Adenotonsillectomy cures or improves sleep apnea in 90% of the children. The remaining patients may need a skeletal correction. So mouth breathing will habitually lower the mandible, which may influence the dentoalveolar morphology, resulting in high arched palate. The high arched palate means it is a narrow maxilla, and that causes poor development of the mandible and the tongue, which causes retrognathia, and there will be an increased lower facial height. The facial, that's what we call it as adenoid face, long face syndrome. So surgical procedures or age group more than 10 to 12, we can do a distraction osteogenesis where 2 or more bony segments are slowly moved apart 1 millimeter by day, turning into bone during 4 to 10 weeks of time. This is usually done when the suture already happened. In the earlier age group, around 5 to 7 or 9, where the transverse diameter of the hard palate can be reopened, that is the mid-palatal suture is reopened with an expandable dental appliance by screwing. So that increases, so this is a patient who is wearing a similar appliance, and just by screwing daily 1 turn or 2 turns will widen the palate horizontally. By horizontally increasing the width of the hard palate will improve the nasal breathing, that by it reduces the nasal resistance. There are a lot of studies clearly tells that 4.8 mm of expansion is being observed, which improves OSA in pediatric age group, and that slowly reduces the obstruction happening in the adult age group. So this rapid maxillary expansion treatment induces widening of the maxilla and corrects the posterior crossbite by improving maxillary and mandibular dental arch coordination. So this is very important that by doing this procedure at this age group, prevents development of patient into an adult OSAS. So, in the management protocol, there are so many soft tissue surgeries, and there is a role for framework surgeries like transpalatal advancement in pure palatal collapse patients where the posterior nasal spine is almost nearer to the posterior pharyngeal wall, thereby causing the vertical palate or vertical velum. And in tongue-based procedures, tongue-based collapse, there is a role for a lot of procedures like genioglottal advancement, advancement genioplasty, or a mandibular advancement, hyoid advancement. All these skeletal procedures can be done. So to conclude, the selection of surgical technique is more important than the technique itself. So how you are going to do, how much variations you are doing to improve the success is the key. So the multidisciplinary approach is a key to success. Thank you.
So thank you, Vijay. I think Srinivas can also now join in.
Yes.
It was really, Vijay, eye-opener, an excellent lecture, because we as ENT surgeons do not know about so many skeletal procedures. Vijay, yeah. So first question I'll ask to Vijay only, because it is a very common question being asked, that do you do these procedures or do you ask your maxillofacial colleague to do this?
Yes, I told in the beginning itself. These extensive procedures, facial-maxillary procedures, will be done by facial-maxillary colleagues.
So I think this is a very, very important thing, that you do not try to become an expert of skeletal surgeries. Exactly. Your maxillofacial surgeon.
If there is any complications happens, you will be questioned in the court of law.
Absolutely correct. So second question I'll ask to Srinivas.
Yeah.
This question is the most asked by Dr. Mahesh Babu from Karimnagar, Dr. Sandeep Jain from Jabalpur, Dr. Srimandir Kumar from Mysore, Dr. Deepesh Maurya, Dr. Sujan Singh from Kathmandu, Dr. Ankit from Bhopal, Dr. Kripa Moy from Silchar, Dr. Lalit from Ranchi, and Dr. Rajnikant from Vijayawada.
Okay.
So now you see how important this question. You should. So Vijay, you be here. Don't run away.
Yeah, I'm here.
No, but you need to be seen also.
Yes.
Switch on your camera. Okay. So Srinivas, the question to you is that
are you feeling like Amitabh Bachchan in Kaun Banega Crorepati?
So the question is that when you cut the epiglottis with being like a chopper, you chop the epiglottis. What will happen to aspiration? Everybody has asked this question.
Okay, so here's something that we need to understand, that actually swallowing mechanism happens because of the larynx coming up. So when when the patient is actually swallowing, the larynx goes up and the tongue base comes down and it actually seals. So it is the larynx coming up that causes the seal. It is not the epiglottis alone which is causing the prevention of aspiration, number one. Number two, if you take examples of all the cancer surgeries that are done, the vertical partial laryngectomies, all these laryngectomies, the aspiration is almost unheard of, number one. And number two, when you are doing the surgery, it is very important that you stay suprahyoid. It is very important that you stay suprahyoid. If you bypass the hyoid, then you land up in trouble. As long as you are suprahyoid, there is no question of aspiration.
Correct. So many people have asked, how do you know that you are at the level of the hyoid when you are inside the?
Yes. So when you are taking any instrument, right, hyoid is a very big bone. You will hit it. You can actually hinge your instrument on the hyoid and actually cut it.
So from inside when you are operating from inside, how do you feel the hyoid?
So when you will actually hit it. You will hit with your tip of your instrument that you are hitting a hard structure.
Okay. So that is the very, very important tip. The other tip could be that you remain away above the lateral glossoepiglottic ligament.
Correct.
Because you showed very beautifully in your surgery that if you go into the lateral glossoepiglottic fold, you will get the branch of the lingual artery.
Lingual artery.
So anyway, you remain above the lateral glossoepiglottic fold. That's your landmark that you are remaining above the hyoid, and you are safe in terms of bleeding also.
Correct.
Now the question is, how do you expose epiglottis? This is asked by Dr. Mahesh Babu and Dr. Harnath from Tirupati. What are the instruments? Do you use emulscope instrument? What do you use?
No. So as I said in the beginning of the talk, I use the
Anesthetic
anesthetic laryngoscope, and I should give credit to my junior colleague Dr. Murthy. What he did was he actually soldered a hook to the handle of the laryngoscope, and I'll be happy to share the pictures of it in the if possible with the Zydus people, so that I can give it to people. So what we just do is, once we put the laryngoscope, we hang it with a Draffin's bipod stand. It is as simple as that.
Fine. The next question is, what suture material do you use? Dr. Abhishek from Patna, to suture the epiglottis.
Yeah, so you use basically simple vicryl suture, regular vicryl suture.
Will you like to tell which number?
Yeah, 20.
Okay.
Because you want the needle to be bigger. If you take a 30, the needle is not big.
Fine. Dr. Akanksha from Mumbai has asked, do you put a Ryle's tube? And Dr. Ashwin Menon from Kozhikode has also asked this question. How do you manage the post-op? So do you put a Ryle's tube?
Patients start eating immediately in the post-operative period.
What, liquid, semi-solids, or proper
semi-solids? Yes, so see, one important thing that I would like to make at this point is, epiglottic surgery is not an isolated surgery. It's a part of multi-level surgery, and whatever norms are for multi-level surgery, the same thing we follow.
Fine. Dr. Carlos from Peru. What about using resecting only a V-shaped thing from the epiglottis in the center, using a 45-degree Colorado needle? He uses that. What is your take on that?
Absolutely, you can use that. I've done the wedge resection with a harmonic scalpel. You can use a Colorado needle.
Perfect. Now, Dr. Abhinav from Patna has asked about you showed the interventional dice.
Yes.
So he has asked, what is the size and material of the nasopharyngeal tube?
You'll have to customize it to the patient's needs. So what you can do is, you can take the nasopharyngeal airway and put it by the side of the patient, and roughly will give you an idea as to what length you are. See, the idea is you want to bypass the palate. Are we looking at a epiglottis which is happening because of any kind of proximal obstruction? So
generally,
3, 4. Yeah, you can go in based on the size.
Based on the size.
Anesthetist will give you the...
Depending on this. Fine. So Srinivas has given a very good hint that you put it on the side and see how long it is, and it should bypass the palate. And the material is generally PVC standard.
Yeah,
so
that's it.
Okay. I think Dr. Harish Madan from Delhi. What drug do you use for interventional dice? Is it different from the routine dice?
No. It's dexmedetomidine.
Dexmed, the standard drug.
Yes.
And Dr. PVLN Murthy from Hyderabad. Role of EMG for hypotonic tongue.
We're not talking about hypotonic tongue. Yes, there is a wonderful role for hypotonic tongue. We need to look at, is it the hypotonia of the tongue, or is it that the maxilla is very narrow, then the tongue is not able to fit into that maxilla when the mouth is closed and the tongue is falling backwards. So you need to rule out whether it is hypotonia or is it a skeletal problem. That also is very important.
Correct. Now a lot of questions for Vijay. Vijay, what is the minimum age for doing skeletal surgery? Dr. Balakrishnan from Manipal.
Whenever the skeletal, pediatric age group, after 10 years, we can intervene surgically, or otherwise we can fix all these appliances. In adult age group, there is no age limitation, because usually these procedures are done as a cosmetic procedures even in younger age groups. So there is no age restriction on that aspect.
Are the facial changes significant? When you make those changes, are the facial changes so significant that the whole passport has to be changed?
Exactly. It can change. So all depends upon how you are going to bring it out. Sometimes even you can bring 1.5 centimeter of mandible forward without changing the position of the dental velar alignment. So that thereby by removing a couple of molar teeth on either side and pull the mandible lower part alone forward without changing the position. At same time, even we can do a genioglottal advancement by removing the labial part and only keeping the lingual part. So all these modifications can be done with discussion with your orthodontist and patients. That all the cosmetic also plays a major role in
Correct.
these procedures.
No,
That's
so
why I'm again and again telling involving the facial collages is very important. Otherwise, you'll be finding it very difficult.
no, so the question again, people have asked this, whether you will do skeletal surgeries only in retrognathia and deformed faces, or you will do it on normal faces also.
In normal faces also we can do, or maybe in mild retrognathics.
Mild
That's
retro.
what I told. That's where we consider this as a phase 2 surgery.
Correct.
When the soft tissue surgeries failed. When there is an obvious mandibular deficiency or maxillary deficiency, we can do as a phase 1 surgery itself.
So the next question is that, is it possible that retrognathia patient will not have tongue-based collapse? He will have a small tongue also, and in spite of having retrognathia, he does not have a tongue-based collapse.
Yes,
It's
it
quite
can also
possible.
happen.
Correct.
It can also
So I think you already mentioned in your lecture that the box can be small, then the contents can be large, and both can be small as
Yes.
well. So it's not true that if you see retrognathia, you'll straight away jump onto
Exactly. No.
skeletal surgery. No. Now, the next question is, what is the maximum advancement? People have asked different, so I'm not naming everybody because the time is also running. So when you do GGA, when you do MMA, and when you do distraction, you named 3 important procedures. The genioglossus advancement, what is the maximum advancement of the tongue possible?
1 centimeter.
With genioglossus advancement.
Genioglossus 7 millimeter to maximum 1 centimeter we can get.
Yeah, because generally it's the thickness of the mandible.
Thickness of the mandible depends upon the thickness. And more thicker, we can advance it more longer. And also that also depends upon the how loose the muscle tone is.
Right.
When the muscle is so relaxed and the tongue, we can pull it forward. We can pull it forward and put a plate.
What is the maximum you can achieve by maxillomandibular advancement?
Maxillomandibular advancement 1.5 centimeter.
So in one stage, you can straight away advance 1.5 centimeter?
Yes. 1.5, just this much.
Centimeter.
1.5
Right.
centimeter.
And with the distraction osteogenesis, how much?
See, distraction osteogenesis depends upon the patient's bone formation, and that is being done 1 millimeter slowly advancing per day. That too, sometimes it will be a half screw, we say. So that is 0.5 millimeter maybe advanced in some patients.
So maximum how much you can achieve?
So maximum 7 millimeter to 1 centimeter. Even every millimeter counts in these patients.
Okay. So we understand that with all these procedures, you can go maximum generally up to 1 centimeter. Only in MMA, you may go up to 1.5 centimeter, but generally otherwise it's 1 millimeter.
1 centimeter is the average.
So the most important question which many people have asked is, what is the criteria? When should you do a base of tongue surgery internal, and when you should go for external framework surgery?
See,
how do you decide whether you will go for internal surgery or external surgery?
To be very frank, the getting acceptance by the patient is not as easy as what we get convinced by the patient, which is getting convinced for a soft tissue surgery. So when you are going to say that to the patient that we are going to break your facial bone, mandibular bone, and we are going to pull it forward, and it all depends upon the patient's understanding. If you are going in our patients, if you are going to do this procedure for a cosmetic appearance, they will be very happy to try. But if you're going to do the same procedure for an OSA, same kind of procedure, the patients are a little hesitant whether is there any other option.
Correct.
So this is what the patient's mental. I'm sure Kishore is also doing a lot of maxillomandibular procedures with his colleagues. So ideally, if mild retrognathics first soft tissue surgery, and if it
Okay.
fails, then only there is an option for a framework surgery.
Fine. So this brings us to the question of Dr. Smita from Bangalore. When it causes facial change, you said it causes facial change. Does it cause legal issue?
No.
So because you have already explained them and taken a consent about the
Yes,
facial change. So
definitely.
Dr. Smita, that answers the question. Dr. P.V. Venu Madhav from Hyderabad. What are commonly used oral appliances in OSA?
Tongue
Oral
retaining
appliance.
devices, mandibular expansion devices. So these two are very commonly used, which my prosthodontist usually getting.
Yeah, so I think having a team of maxillofacial colleagues and prosthodontics is very, very important
Very
to
important.
to give a overview of sleep apnea treatment to the patient. And I think we have answered most of the questions. I have actually pooled a lot of questions into one because people are asking similar questions. I think I've been able to take care of most of them. Dr. Prakash Munka has congratulated. Hi, Dr. Vijay Vikas Srinivas. Every time I listen to your talks, I get an idea or two to implement in my practice. And thanks for repeatedly emphasizing the topic. Thank you, Dr. Munka.
Thank you,
We
sir.
understand.
Grateful.
Yeah. So I think it was a great session. We had a series of sleep apnea talks on the surgical issues. So I think today we'll come to the end of series 1. We have a lot of requests for dealing into more detail about DICE, like 1.5 to 2 hour sessions on DICE, then one on physiology. See, because the physiology should not be remain so complicated. We should not talk too much about loop gain and this, because that's not understandable. So basically for ENT surgeons, what physiology, how much physiology they can understand. So one session is asked on the relevant anatomy and physiology. So we'll possibly maybe after a week or two, this is too much. Dr. Munka was telling me in the morning, every evening you take 2 hours, now give it a break. So I'm really thankful to Zydus for conducting this whole series 1. And maybe after a gap of a week or two, we'll come back with our series 2 on these relevant things. We'll discuss with Vijay Srinivas, and all of us will discuss. And for this session, I really thank Dr. Srinivas Kishore from Hyderabad and Dr. Vijay Krishnan once again from the bottom of my heart to accept my invitation to join me in this series, because honestly, the kind of epiglottic videos and the work that Srinivas does, I do not do. I do not have that kind of work or videos, and the kind of external framework you do, Vijay, I do not have. But at the same time, one person cannot do everything. So it's a teamwork, as you rightly said. Even in the soft tissue surgeries, we complement each other. And I sincerely thank both of you for accepting our invitation. And again, sincere thanks from my side to all our viewers, around 1500 of them every day. So thanks, colleagues. And I thank once again, Dr. Ashwin, Mr. Sachin, Abhishek, the whole team of Zydus for conducting so well series 1 of OSA. We'll come back soon with series 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vikas.
Dr. Ashwin.
Thank you, all of you. I wanted to extend thanks to both the speakers, Dr. Vijay Krishnan and Dr. Srinivas. And of course, we were having some other moderators on different occasions. Dr. Haldipur, Dr. Vidyasagar Ramakrishnan, and all of the moderators which have joined us. Not only that, the excellent the idea Dr. Vikas Agarwal suggested is the practical aspects of ENT surgeries. So I think it is his genesis. Because of him, we are here, and we are very proud that we are part of this program. I also wanted to thank all the delegates. Over a period of last 6 days, the number is constant. So around 1500 doctors are joining every day. So almost all the ENT surgeons who are practicing in India, who are facing day-to-day problems in their daily surgical procedure, mostly I think most of them are resolved. I think they have taken something at home so that they can practice in their day-to-day clinical work. Not only that, I wanted to thanks to my colleagues. I think our entire marketing and sales team have worked very, very hard because these are very challenging times, and getting doctors online and all this is very difficult. Especially Mr. Sachin and Abhishek, they have worked very hard. Not only that, we are not stopping here. This is just a small goodbye. We are again going to come back with some interesting topics, as Dr. Vikas has already suggested, after a gap of say 6 to 7 days. Dr. Vikas, you want to say something?
Yeah, just wanted to say that I am getting a lot of requests from people that the recording of these sessions, those who have missed on certain days,
Yeah.
they want to have the recording of this session. So can they log on to the same portal and
Yes.
have...
I am going to announce that after you complete the session, you can download the certificate and you will have an archive link. So all these programs will be available almost for a month. So you can go and watch all these things that Dr. Vikas had shown, Dr. Srinivas had shown, Dr. Vidya Krishnan had shown, and many of the topics or the question they wanted to know the exact answer, what kind of suture materials, everything you can go and watch. So that's it from my side. I think again, thanks to all of you and thanks all the delegates from my bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you,
Kabhi,
Zaidus. Thank
kabhi
you.
alvida na kehna.
Definitely.
Kabhi alvida na kehna. We'll be back soon. Bye.
Bye bye.